Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abi.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
One way or
I
another.
used all of my self-control because I wanted to do that.
Find you.
I got you. Before he started recording, I was singing that in a real creepy voice.
And then I looked at her and she's like, okay, I'll stop.
Stop.
And I hit record because mostly I just wanted to be the one to do it.
One way or another. I'm gonna find you.
We're going to get you. Get ya. Right, Rachel?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'm a little scared.
We got our friend Rachel on the podcast today. We'll get around to you in a second.
All right, I'll just sit here quietly. Just how you want all of your women. In silence.
For those of you that are new, that's just a joke.
That's
jokes.
Just a joke. Jokes.
But it's a misogynistic joke Justin would happily make.
I love misogynistic jokes.
Because you find things funny if they're not true to you.
Yeah, if they're not true to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If I was a misogynist, like
You just find it real.
yeah, I'd be like,
Why are you laughing?
Why am I joking about this? we have basically all women hired for us. We recently hired a guy. We needed a diversity hire, so we hired a man.
We needed a
So you can have one buddy.
That's funny.
For my soul.
Aw.
Anyways, yeah, so we'll get going in a second in our conversation. We did recently play a little bit of Top Golf.
Yesterday,
Yes,
and
I
guess
murdered you. Almost, actually. When I hit the ball and almost smashed your head with it. Like, I'm terrible at golf. I'm not going to blame that on my father and I's relationship and our outburst at 18 years old on a golf course. Sounds like something that happened, though, the way I'm describing it.
Sounds like you got some passive aggressive feelings under there that you're just
Took a turn.
dying to talk about. That reminds me of all those people that like you're just randomly having a conversation and they're like, let me tell you this story. And they just re-dive into their trauma. You doing that right now?
What? Top Golf is pretty fun.
I killed you.
Well,
I killed
on
everyone.
Angry Birds. You didn't even know how to golf. It just was like, you just kept smacking it in the same spot. It happened to be that the Angry Birds were right there.
We played Angry Birds and I beat all of these people who are actually talented, better at golf than
I wouldn't
me.
have called
And I killed them.
anyone in our group talented, okay? Out of like 30 people, there wasn't one talented golfer there, okay?
Okay, but you
Capable.
all have played golf more than me.
Not me.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah, you have. I've never hit the ball like that before.
Never once?
No.
Oh, well then.
So I killed it. I was so impressed with myself.
Well
I
done.
won so many times. I got like 250,000 points and the person closest to me was like 130.
Yeah. It's a neat story.
I didn't know I was good at golf.
That you're not. That wasn't good. Like no one there was good. Like
What if I'm secretly good at golf?
no, I'll put you out on the green right next to us while golfers go by. I'll be like, judge my wife.
Judge my wife. Maybe I could get good if I really spent a lot of time.
Anybody could, right?
Yeah, anybody could.
Really. So today we're gonna jump into a wonderful conversation with Rachel. Recently, we'd had a conversation about attachment and attachment regarding God and stuff like that. We're gonna poke around a little bit more in the God conversation because that's something that we have brought up in this podcast. Obviously, we're kind of like a holistic podcast. We talk about emotions and spiritual life and physical stuff. But, you know, everyone who listens to us, they know that we have a background within regards to a relationship with Jesus and God. And that's been profoundly impacted the way that we see life, the way that we go about seeing emotions healed inside of people's worlds. And if you've listened long enough to our story, you know that both Abi and I have battled health issues, and Abby's had a mom that's battled real health issues. And I mean, everybody has some level of health issues, but we've had some really strong ones. And that's...
I'd call mine extreme sports edition.
Yeah. And
Like you should get a
If
medal
everyone
for it.
has health issues, then I would say I'm in the like the Olympics.
Yeah. And, with health issues and a faith, because we've talked a lot about faith, and we both believe and have an experience within faith that also has supernatural healing accompany it. We've seen miraculous healings in people's lives, not just from a distance hearing stories, but participated in experiences. And that's left pain and confusion at times for our own journey of like, how does this work? Why doesn't this work for us? Like a lot of conversations around that. And we know that other people who sometimes ask the question, like, is God real and stuff, whether or not they believe in healing and stuff, they ask the question, if God is real and a loving God, why is there so much sickness on the earth? And that's a very big pain point, especially when we watch people, our loved ones, die of cancer or suffer their entire lives with certain debilitating sicknesses. And so we want to have a conversation today. And our friend Rachel here went through quite a season herself of watching her mother-in-law pass away.
From a very cruel disease.
Yeah.
ALS.
Yes.
For those of you who want to know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we want to kind of get into the conversation around that and processing pain around that area and belief systems.
Yeah. I think I have a lot of people message me about this. So I grew up in a charismatic church culture. Yeah. And which you would say like religious institution culture, like a charismatic belief systems. And that created a lot of worldview for me. When you're in church, you're picking up on a lot of the cues and a lot of the things that they're saying. And so then you're trying to filter your life experience with all the things that you're hearing, and it can be very complicated.
Yeah.
And I have found that was probably one of the biggest pain points for me, and ended up becoming a very traumatic thing for me when I was really, really sick, which was, I am in excruciating pain and completely hopeless about my body and what's happening. And in the meantime, also feeling so abandoned by God and so disconnected from God because of my theology and the confusion around where is God in moments like this. And so I was having a conversation with Rachel the other day at the office, and we were just kind of talking through some of the journey that we've both been on. And I thought it'd just be good to have that conversation publicly so people could hear about the process. So I'll start with me, and then we'll just have you share a little bit.
Sounds great.
I grew up.
And for those of you who don't know who Rachel is, before you get going.
Sorry.
Surprise!
Rachel, our friend, if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard Rachel on here. She's one of our...
If you've gone through LFA or the Pathway to Freedom.
She's in those. And she's also one of our master consultants with our year-long life consulting masterclass.
Yeah.
So she's with us helping to facilitate transformation in people's lives and impart the tools and skills that we've developed here.
She's actually probably been with us for like 12 years maybe now.
I want to say 10, maybe more.
Yeah.
I would say
it's at least a decade.
At least a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've just been a stoneball barnacle. I just stuck on and then hung on for dear life. I'm never letting go.
And it's been beautiful. We've gotten to see you transform and go through so much and grow through so much and become and now you're a freaking boss at life and help so many people. Rachel is someone that is an avid learner and researcher, and you're constantly developing both your own heart and your understanding of the human experience. Yes. And so you're a wealth of knowledge and capabilities. It's pretty astounding to see how you operate. I'm like, we've got a ninja with us here today. Yeah, we do.
Oh. Well, I should come on more often just to get compliments.
Fair.
Fun.
Fair. Okay, so I had health issues my whole life, and also grew up in a church that believed in healing since I was a little kid. And then my mom, at least by 7, she was having pretty significant health issues, and every year got worse and worse and worse. And so there was definitely like a desperation for God to heal her so that I could have a mom back,
Yeah, which is
like
reasonable.
Obviously I wanted her to be healed for her, but I also switched out of getting to be the daughter and became the caregiver to take care of my mom. And so the desperate prayer was like, if you healed my mom, then I could be the kid again and my mom could be a functioning adult, and that would feel so great. So it felt like probably just desperation and disappointment and along those lines. And then there's a lot of kooky beliefs out there about healing, and something I wasn't prepared for that as a kid. Like, you're not really aware that there's a lot of different ways to view things. And so I didn't have the ability and the discernment to be able to know, like, do I believe this or not? And so charismatic culture, if you've never grown up around it, there's definitely belief. There's no judgment in this. I just want to be able to talk honestly about what is. Like, this is just me saying what is, not whether it's good or bad. It's probably both. But it's this belief that at any given moment, a breakthrough can happen that can change your life. Every service, or often services, have that woven into it, even through how they communicate. Like, this could change your life. Everything here could change. Like, one prayer and your whole world could be different. And every altar call. So altar calls, if you don't know what that is like, they do some kind of call for, like, if you need healing in your body, or like if you struggle with anxiety or whatever the issue is, you could come forward or raise your hand or look up, or, there's lots of different ways that you can respond. I've done altar calls. So I'm not saying good or bad. And then the idea is that you get prayer, and there is a belief that in those moments, everything in your life can change. And that belief is supported by hearing a ton of stories your whole life of how somebody got prayer in a moment like that, and it changed their whole life. They got miraculously healed. Their anxiety went away completely. They never struggled with suicidal thoughts again. And so you're
Total
in an
drug addiction's
gone,
just gone
instantaneously.
Which I've seen that happen with people.
Yeah. And I think this is an amazingly hope-filled thing.
Yeah.
To be in an environment where, like, there is hope that you're not stuck.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. That's beautiful. The pain part of it, though, is like that really has to be married with the process, because it's very disheartening if you go up for every prayer and you never have a miraculous everything changed in this moment for me. And you never have I went up for every depression call and it did not go away. And I went up for every healing altar call and it did not go away.
Which we've had, I was just talking to a guy a couple weeks ago when I was at the men's retreat, and he was talking about, like, hey, I went up to every altar call and I never got the freedom from my depression and stuff, but I got transformation in the emotional health arena. And so I don't know what to do with that. Like, that was a pain for him,
right? Where
he had the disappointment of, I kept going back and it wasn't solving it in those moments.
Yeah. And
so you have that mixed experience, right? Like, I'm just elaborating on what you're saying. Like,
yeah. And I think, like, we just did a podcast around acceptance, and I think expectations are so tricky because you simultaneously need hope to not get stuck. So you need the expectation that your life can change and that your life will change. But false expectations create so much disappointment, and disappointment creates hope deferred, and hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. So if you go up to the altar call and you're expecting that you're going to have a one-time moment that changes your whole life, and that doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen again and again and again, it can become very disheartening, and you can feel like, what is going on?
Yeah. And I would say too, like, if you've experienced any type of, like, feelings of abandonment inside of your life story already, then that energetic cycle of that experience of longing to be met and then not feeling met over and over and over again can feel so horrible inside the human soul.
And I think you worded that brilliantly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened to me is it started to become an addiction, not an addiction, but like an emotional hook, a trigger for my abandonment. So every time I was sick, it would just hook all of the pain of every abandonment that I'd ever experienced. But now it would put the face of God on that.
Oof.
God doesn't want to meet my needs. He sees me and isn't moved with compassion towards me.
And then it makes it so high stakes anytime that you don't get the healing, because now it's like proving true.
Yes.
So now you're like, does God care about me or not?
Right.
Is up on the...
If I get healed or not, or if my anxiety magically goes away or not.
Yes, 100%.
Yes.
It's like on trial every time, and which then feels so high stakes.
And then, so what happened to me, and now I wish I could go back to myself when I was sick. I have so much more understanding of PTSD and trauma now.
Yeah.
And I was fully in PTSD and trauma, probably actually my whole life. I would say it started at least by 9th grade. I was having really strong PTSD.
Yeah.
I was behaving with PTSD. But now I would go back, because what I really was hope, like building all of this hope, like a fantasy hope. I need to get out of this pain. And the only way I can do that is if God heals me. And then that will prove that he loves me. And like you said, so now it's very high stakes. Does he love me or not?
Yeah.
Am I alone or not? And if I am alone, I think that's the greatest crisis the human soul can go through.
Yeah.
Which is I am fully alone in suffering. Yeah. So now I look back and I think, I just needed to get regulated and to stop obsessing. Like I've noticed in PTSD, it's very easy to OCD loop over what you think the solution is that will give you what you think you need. So what I thought I needed was to be supernaturally healed right away in order for me to be okay. And now I've learned I absolutely want to be supernaturally healed, but I can actually be okay inside and outside of that. And I didn't know that was true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
Do you want to share a little bit about you, and then we'll go back and forth?
Totally. I was just absorbing. I agree with what you just said. Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up in a similar culture. I think of it as like charismania. I don't know why that feels appropriate.
Totally.
Because it did sometimes feel a little bit manic. Like the high intensity. And like, I think being around a lot of like desperation and urgency, like there's a sense of, I think there's a real beauty to hope and expectation. And just like you were saying, like our soul needs hope to live. But also I think it can very easily, like when you feel hope deferred, it's very easy to go into like, how can I control making something happen?
Yes.
Right. And I think that the problem of suffering is how vulnerable it freaking feels and out of control we are. And so I think that I grew up in a culture that like very easily sort of went into this sense of, and you named it really well, like this almost OCD obsession of like, if I can do these 3 things, if I can be pure enough, if I can be holy enough, if God will like, if I can like trick God into thinking that I want him enough in like just the right way, then he will meet me.
Yep.
Which almost kind of ends up feeling kind of superstitious.
Absolutely.
Like, a little bit like step on a crack and break your mom's back. Like I remember like being a little kid, and I remember just like sitting whenever I'd be like praying or hoping for something, and then just like sitting in the car and just under my breath, like just repenting over and over, like, God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It was this idea of like my holiness or like my purity or really like my own self-righteousness would draw God to me. And if God's not being drawn to me, then
it's because you didn't do enough.
Yeah. I'm not like in like, and it can become almost sort of very black and white thinking, very like everything sort of sorted as good and bad. And for me, it almost felt like borderline mental illness, like the level that I was monitoring every little thought that went to my mind and every little behavior that went through my mind.
Yeah. It's very paranoid, very superstitious. It's like combination lock God is what I think of.
Or like slot machine God.
I'm trying to find the exact right combination. And I remember this, like for years, I'd be like, well, maybe if this exact person prays for me when I'm wearing this exact colored shirt at this exact right moment, or maybe if I repent, and you know, here's the thing that happens is people really want to help. And so they say really superstitious things. Maybe if you stop hating yourself, I can't tell you how many times people did not know that my whole life journey was working on overcoming self-hatred, and so I had spent years going after self-love, and that ended up becoming what I became famous for, was like my self-love journey. People who didn't know that, though, I would still have health issues, and they'd pray for me, and they'd be like, I just feel like if you learn to love yourself, this will go away. And I can't say, there's so many of those things that you hear. If you, I had a sticker fall off my hat, and I thought it was a spider and it scared me a lot. Okay. There's so many things that, like, if you confess the right thing, if you forgive the right people, if you have enough faith, all of the things end up becoming, I am so focused on me and what I'm doing right or wrong. And it ends up creating self-hatred. Because if you're not getting the answer you want, the only thing you think you can blame it on is you. Like, I must be doing it wrong then. Either I must be doing it wrong, or God's a real freaking a-hole. Yeah.
And it's such a, you want certainty so much. And then when you're in prolonged uncertainty, people want to offer you certainty.
Yes.
Because it's the idea of certainty will fix it. Certainty will solve it. And so, yes, I highly relate with the here's the 3 things that if you could do these 3 things just right,
then the answer will come.
For sure, your breakthrough will happen.
Which, by the way, that this is applicable in and outside of the faith institution, because it's this exact behavior. I mean, you can eradicate God out of the whole picture, and these conversations happen on the regular. Like, if you just do these exact things inside of your life, this is going to be this is the equation that will get you to this point, and everything will be good. Everything will be fine, right?
100%. There's such a desire to feel in control.
Yes.
In any type of prolonged suffering.
Yeah. Well, really, even in not suffering, we just like being
and just control. The vulnerability of being human.
Yes.
That feels
so
true.
Nice to be in control. I think as we're talking about it, we'll go back to your story, but when I look back on when I was the most sick, I see that so much of these beliefs for me were adding trauma and torment.
Gasoline to the pain.
Yes. And so I was in constant, Justin could, he watched it. I was in such great emotional agony.
I mean, I would say I probably have secondhand trauma from what I went through watching you in your agony. It was really a rough season.
Yeah. And I was doing all of that. What is the answer? What is the thing I have to do? And then it reminds you of your childhood and what do I have to do to make my parents happy? Why will they 100%. Never be happy with me?
Which sickness, honestly, even from a scientific perspective, anxiety perpetuates even more sickness, because your body gets inflamed, all kinds of stuff. This is just from a doctor's standpoint.
Yeah, stress is one of the worst things you can do. Stress is the worst thing you can do.
So it's only amplifying the stress that you're having about trying to get out of it. And all that stuff.
I remember my doctor being like, whatever you do, don't stress. And I was like, what the F does that mean? How do you not stress in the middle of it? That's freaking great. You know what causes my stress? Being sick. You know when I won't be stressed is when I'm better. And so it was
stressed about trying to not be stressed.
Yes. And you become paranoid about everything, because then you're like, oh no, I'm doing something that's making me sick. And you start looking inward, and it is like a hamster wheel, a treadmill that you are just rolling on of your works, your failure, your works, your failure. What is it that I need to do? What's the right concoction I need to make?
Which I think, again, in that universally can go even outside of the faith realm.
Oh, yeah.
People can get caught in these
I did
cycles.
that with my own medication. What's the exact way to take this medication that will work? What's the exact way to eat
combination, right?
that will fix this so that I don't feel this pain? What's the exact, we're looking for something to obsess over that we can have control of
to alleviate
pain.
Yeah. And to distract too. It's I can put turn the volume up over the thing that I can occupy my mind with, so I don't have to be in my body and feel the sensation of suffering. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and keep. Just so you guys know, we will talk about the good parts. I have a lot of hope and faith where I'm at now, and I feel like I'm in a completely different situation, which is why we're having this conversation. But I do just want to kind of shine the light on what it can be like, so people can see themselves in that story.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and then I think another thing that really added to it for my personal story was my mother-in-law. So my husband, right after we got married, it was actually only a few months into our marriage that she first started showing symptoms of ALS. And then within the first year of our marriage, we moved to Indiana, which was a wild thing that we did, and lived in their basement while she was dying. And I think, up until this point, I had gone to BSSM, which is literally School of Supernatural Ministry. So I felt like I had a lot of like pretty like sort of balanced-ish views of God, but also not. Like I had a lot of these things that we're talking about, and then also had a lot of like goodness of God philosophy, or like that God wants to heal, and that he like wants to show up and be a part of our redemption story type of beliefs, which my mother-in-law also had. She had a very, 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 very strong like faith that she was going to be healed, and a lot of how she survived the pain of dying was holding really tightly to, I got to make my healing happen.
Right.
And that was her fight. Her fight was like, I'm going to make this healing happen. And that became, again, a bit obsessive. Like, I can't go get on this medication because if I get on that medication,
faith.
Yeah, I can't go use, like at one point there was this like device where it was going to help her like communicate because she lost the ability to speak. And she didn't want to go do that because she felt like he was telling God that she didn't believe in her healing. But then we felt like there's no connection that we're going to have with you if we can't talk to you. And that felt like so intense. And she would have really high stakes emotions about God. And most of what she wanted to talk about in that time of her life was, do you think God's going to heal me? Do you believe that God's going to heal me? Do you have faith that God's going to heal me? And it felt like if you didn't have faith, you were kind of like
pushed out.
Yeah. Like a little bit of like not wanted in the process.
Totally.
Because if your unfaith gets near my faith, then it'll get on me.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of like just some challenging experiences being on the other side of it, which felt really hard not to know what to do with that on the inside of me, because there was a big part of me that felt kind of all or nothing about it. Like there was a part of me that wanted to be like, screw this theology then. Like, what do I need to do to accept the fact that you're dying?
Right.
Which,
because you're an emotional health person. So at that point, you're like, I need to be able to process emotionally what's happening.
And I do think like part of what felt really hard and honestly very heartbreaking for me was so much of the urgency around trying to be healed distracted from being able to be present in the experience and being able to have present conversations where we're like having end of life conversations about it. And to be honest, I think I had like somewhat of like a Hallmark version in my mind of like what death would be like. I was like, we're gonna like show all the like
hold hands and kumbaya and talk through our favorite memories.
Yes, like I thought this is gonna be like my chance with her
to
bond before I never get to have a mom again was like what I felt on the inside. And so part of like why I codependently signed up for this activity to go to Indiana. And part of it was the little girl in me wanting so bad to like have an experience with her before she died. Yeah. And so that was really complicated for me of like, here's this theology that I do think I believe in a part of it, but it feels like the thing that's really getting in the way of love and connection in the moment. And in that way, it felt confusing to figure out God in the middle of that.
Oh, yeah.
Like it felt like, how does he feel about? Like it felt very confusing to me.
Totally.
And so that was a hard dynamic to navigate.
Among all the other, here's what happens is I'm listening to that and I'm like, of course your mother-in-law was doing that because she was in trauma brain.
Yes.
And everybody does something weird. Like everybody does. Whether it is like clinging to faith or it's like obsessing over how
100%.
Everything is in your room and making sure it's all the right order, or whether it's like denying that you're dying entirely. Like everybody does something intense
Yeah.
when they're in trauma. There's no way for us to not. We're trying to figure out how to survive.
Cope and survive the whole situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll put it somewhere.
100%.
So
It makes sense.
I'm listening to it and I'm like, whether or not you even believe in God, of course, there's always going to be something that people do when the pain feels like too big for them to know what to do with it.
And honestly, that was really healing for me to think about of like, because she had such a fight response. And it was later on after she'd passed in processing it that I was like, her whole life, she had a wild life. She was like such a badass. She'd overcome so much, but really she had to have this like level of fight. Like, I am not going to lay down or I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Like, way that she survived her really crazy and a lot of times very traumatic life.
Yeah.
And so in hindsight, there was a sense of like peace that I felt in my soul to be like, if she wasn't going to fight with God, she was going to fight with something else.
And then at least that wasn't us.
Yeah. Like she was going to employ a strategy to feel like she could fight that.
To feel in
fight
control.
death.
Yeah.
So that which honestly, like the most vulnerable thing you can imagine.
Yeah.
Feeling as a human is imminent to death.
Yeah.
So it makes so much sense.
And you hear all these stories of people, not even Christians, just like people that are like, I chose in my mind that I was going to make it and I did. Like I've seen so many stories on like YouTube or news stations where there was like somebody that was like locked in their body and paralyzed and they were like, no, I will live. And then they relearn how to do everything. I used the power of my
will and I brought myself back out of the coma.
Yeah. So it's like
so
one
true.
of those things where you're like, we can't ever say something is bad.
Yes.
Because it works sometimes, but also it can create a lot of pain and yeah.
And I think for me, like it helped me in being able to sort of weed out my view of God to sort of be able to see the underlying.
She would have done that regardless.
And to see the underlying surviving skill of that. Like I think that a lot of times like how I would have interpreted it before going on an emotional health journey was like, should she have believed in that theology or not?
Right.
Is that theology bad?
Right or wrong?
Is that theology
theology causing the trauma or is that theology saving her?
Exactly. And so now it feels a lot more like, oh, her response to death was to have this fight response. And the main way that she employed that was with her spiritual beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very gracious way to look at it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. The reason me and Rachel were talking about this the other day is I found this guy. His name's Roger Sapp. And I don't even know how I found him, honestly. But
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, one time on like YouTube, I think, somehow he popped up.
Old school Texas guy.
I had so much pain over healing and like my mom never being healed and being around this my whole life that healing conferences, healing preachers, healing, all of it I hated. I had
total offense.
Same.
Yeah. And so many things are just they've got so many weird things that cause condemnation if you're the sick person who's never been healed.
Right.
And so my idea of hearing about God as a healer was filled with like pain and like just a mirror of how inadequate you are or how effed up you are, or how unloved you are, or how whatever you are. And I wouldn't consciously say that. I wouldn't be like, yeah, healing makes me aware that I'm not enough. Like I would have been like, no, I believe God is a healer and he loves everyone. And I know that it's not about if he loves me or not, that I haven't been healed. Like I would have said things.
Totally.
But subconsciously, that's what it felt like. So I avoided healing theology in general. And somehow I found him and I listened to him. And it was the first time I'd ever heard something that I could listen to the whole way through. I listened to it the whole way through. There's like 4 different things he has on YouTube. And I was so moved and compelled because it felt like good news. It didn't feel it didn't feel like condemnation. It didn't feel superstitious.
It didn't feel like you had to be the source of the faith and muster up enough of it to experience. Like it wasn't all dependent on your works, right?
And the interesting thing is, so I have spent years, going on the emotional health journey. And one of the things I've learned is like the law of faith works. I'm not talking about Christian faith. I'm talking about like what you believe like in your subconscious, in your knower, you will replicate in your life. If you believe you're only worthy of abuse, you will find abusive people over and over and over and over again. If you believe that everything will always work out for you, but like actually in your knower, not just you want to believe
not
that.
just a logic thing, but in the gut place of knowing.
Yeah. That kind of faith. Those people, I watch them. I have a friend who's like that. They just believe everything will work out and things always do.
Yeah.
You're like,
so true.
I don't know how that happens, but it does work for you. And so I knew, I understood the concept of like what we believe affects our lives, and I understood the concept of building faith and vision. You know, like we've had podcasts where we talk about vision boards, and I've seen my beliefs transform my life. Like I started out having so many fears about money, and then I changed my beliefs about money, and it took years to do that. It took me like reading new materials, hearing new thoughts, processing out loud, doing inner healing on the places I was stuck. It was like over and over and over again. I had a lot of resistance towards the idea that I could make money, that I could be successful, that I could be powerful, that I could be in business. I mean, Justin for years would be like, no, you could be a powerful businesswoman. Yeah. And that was so hard for me to believe. But I understand the concept of limiting beliefs, and our life will follow what we believe. So I wrestled with my beliefs until my beliefs started to transform. And then my life started to show it. I started having great business ideas. I started leading in multiple businesses. I started I started making more money than I thought I could. And so it began to be, I saw that with self-love. Yeah. When I hated myself, I believed I could never be in my own body. I thought I could never be fun or funny. I didn't think I could be playful. And I worked on loving myself and pushing past all the resisting beliefs that I had. And it was years of process. It was years of my inadequacies coming up, and then me having to hear truth, and then me wrestling with truth, and me having conversations with people, and me doing inner healing. And there's like a wrestling process to get rid of beliefs that feel very true to you. But I've seen that it can transform your life. Yeah. And so I know that it's possible. I would say in a lot of areas in my life, I've seen if you go on the journey of transforming your beliefs, your circumstances will follow. Yeah. So when I heard him, he felt like he talked kind of practically about like
from a very logical, like, oh, it's just simple. That's what it is.
And it wasn't emotional. It wasn't like, and I think I'd been in so many emotionally manipulative situations.
Right, trying to charge your emotions and get you emotionally hyped to buy into something.
Yeah, totally. Because faith does work. Listen, like whether you believe in God or not, like that's why I'm saying that there's people who aren't Christians who are like, I will walk again. And they do because they have faith for it. Yeah. And so faith does work. And so oftentimes in church, we're trying to build faith. Us as leaders, we want faith in the room because we know that's where like incredible things happen, but it can feel emotionally manipulative.
Yeah, it can feel like whiplash. Yeah. You're getting really excited and then really excited and then defeat in your nervous system over and over and over again.
Yes. Yeah. So he didn't do any of that. No. Like he didn't have any hype. It was like very like, this is like, and he laid it out in the same kind of way that I have already laid things out with emotional health, with beliefs. Like here's the resistance that comes up and here's the things that helps you not agree with the resistance. Yeah. And this is the journey you can go on. It felt very simple, very easy, not about you striving. In fact, he actually says, if you're striving, you literally aren't in faith. And that was like a huge light bulb because I would have told you for years, I have faith that God will heal. Right. Yeah. I have faith.
Which was more of a logical belief. You had a logical belief.
I think I had a lottery fantasy.
When I say about a logical belief, it was like I have knowledge from somewhere in my knower, in my brain knower of like, yeah, I've read that this is what happens. I've heard people say it. Yeah, it should logically be able to happen.
It always felt like a Hail Mary to me where I was like throwing up a football, just hoping somebody would catch it.
Well, I think that sometimes the urgency of desperation can kind of feel a little bit like faith. Because you're like, I'm like pulling in something so badly. And I'm like feeling like I need it so bad. I'm not going to be okay if it doesn't happen. I think that energy sometimes can feel like I'm having an experience of faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would have said I had it the whole time. But then when I started hearing like faith doesn't beg, faith doesn't strive, faith isn't in desperation.
Faith doesn't bake.
Beg.
B-E-G.
Faith doesn't bake. No muffins
That's
for
also a
faith.
slogan.
Faith doesn't beg. Yeah.
You say beg.
I said beg.
Bake.
But it made me start to realize, like, now I look back and I'm like, my nervous system was in fight. And would you say fight the whole time, Rachel? Is that what you'd say? If your nervous system is like wound up the entire time striving? Fight or flight,
Fight or
maybe?
flight. Yeah,
that's
probably
what I was
would be
thinking.
the same branch.
Probably the same thing.
Yeah.
But so I was like constantly striving, constantly trying. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, if you're begging there now, take your begging to God, because you might as well like take it to somebody. But that isn't actually what I think faith is now.
Yeah.
And that feels relieving to me, because it means I don't have to. And I spent years believing that if I threw a big enough fit, if God finally saw how past myself I was, how much past capacity I was, how much pain I was in. Because I think I did experience that in childhood. When I had a huge meltdown, my parents came.
Can see you. Yeah.
And they could see me and they were compassionate. If my meltdown got big enough, people got involved in my life. So I think the whole time I was sick, I was like having the big meltdown, thinking, now will you say it's enough? And I just remember saying to my counselor all the time, I'm crying, uncle. Like, I don't think I can take more. Why is this not enough to get God to move? Like, why can't I get him to have compassion when I don't think that was what was happening at all now?
Yeah. And what I really love about the Roger Sapp thing that I was listening to is, for those of you who like the nervous system terminology, he felt very regulated when he was talking about it the whole time. Yep. And, I really think that like healing happens inside of regulation and not inside of fear. And,
faith, I think, happens inside of regulation.
Yes, I would agree. And he even said something that made me think about it. He was like, I think he just made like an offhand statement of like, God's the easiest to please, was the line that he said. He's the easiest person in the world to please. And I was like immediately offended in my body. I was like, no, that's not true. And I was like, oh, I really do think that a part of me is still oriented around fear as a strategy to try to get my needs met. Like if I get fear and scared and intense and fight or flight energy and anxiety, like that's going to be able to pull in the thing that I need. And what it feels like he was articulating so well is like orienting around goodness, orienting around safety, orienting around, to me, again, faith, that sense of like almost like attunement. And what it felt like he was describing was like healing in attunement with God instead of healing like really when you're in fight or flight, you're in fear and you're in your disconnection circuits. You're no longer in your connection circuits. And so I immediately thought to myself like, oh, that just makes sense. Like that healing from God would come from connection with God, which also means that like I can relax. Like I can relax into the safety of God. And that's really like the sort of the spot where healing can occur emotionally and physically. And again, it's not as much about like, here's the way to make it happen, but it was sort of like a wonderful light bulb to me that like fear wasn't going to be the thing that generated
you
love.
Getting to him.
Yeah.
One of the things a long time ago I kind of came across was, we were talking about anxiety. It was this idea that we throughout our lives, kids, adults, will hear conversations where people go, well, aren't you worried about that? Like, like when we're in a situation where we can't do anything, where we're out of control. Well, aren't you worried about that? Don't you have anxiety about that? As if like that's the thing that we need to do. Like if I have anxiety, that will be the thing that gets me to my solution, right? And for me in my own journey, I remember having this internal exchange with God where it was like, you keep believing that you can go through anxiety to get to my nature, but my nature is never anxiety, and anxiety will never lead you back to my nature of goodness and love, because anxiety isn't rooted in love. It's rooted in fear. And so it was this idea of...
Now, that being said, it doesn't mean if you have anxiety, you can't get to God. That's not what he's saying.
Yeah, it's just saying, like, if we want to get to if we want to create an expression of love, and we're hoping that love and peace and joy is like the ultimate outcome, a life that's rested, like going through the doorway of anxiety as our solution to get to it isn't going to be like the way to get to it.
Yeah.
Grace will still meet us in it and calm us down out of our anxiety. But anyways, the point is that instead of going to anxiety, I actually had to start to partner with peace. So in traumatic or painful situations or that felt chaotic and out of control, like my part, like, okay, what's the part I can do? Well, freaking out didn't give me solutions in any way, shape, or form.
We tried it.
But what I could do is I could go partner with peace. I could actually settle into that place of regulation, that place of peace, and being like, all right, I'm going to engage with the idea that I can trust that solutions are on the horizon for whatever my problems happen to be. And within that place of peace, I both got connected to clarity and creativity and wisdom. Like there was a flow. I wasn't in some 4F response where my cortisol levels were blowing out and I couldn't even think. Like I could actually come into my body, be present with logical thoughts, and be present with gut responses of that felt like truth. And so to me, when I'm looking at this, you know, if we can begin to go, I'm going to engage into a place of peace in whatever the circumstances, whether it's a health issue or it's a problem inside of my life, I'm at least giving myself my body and my mind and my emotions, everything that it needs to have the best opportunity to get momentum going forward.
Yeah. For me, this looked like, and this was really hard. So when I was really sick, I remember, and I was starting to transform my beliefs. I had to release the need to be healed in that moment, which felt crazy because I was in so much pain. All I wanted was out. But to get out of striving and urgency and desperation, I had to like let go and be like, okay, this is not, I actually have to learn how to be regulated more than hold on to this destination that I'm trying to hold on to, which holding on to the destination with anxiety of getting healed wasn't getting me healed.
Yeah.
So, but my brain told me it was. My brain told me if I obsess over this, if I do everything right,
enough,
if I say enough scriptures over it, if I pray enough, if I get enough people to pray, all of these things, I like Roger Sapp really debunks a lot of the superstitions, which is what I love. But I had to, I remember this has happened so many times in the last 2 years when I've been really sick. I've been like, I have to let go of needing the answer right now. And I have to hold on to like, no, how do I not worry about getting healed right now? How do I just figure out how to connect to the idea of God as loving and good outside of that thing? And for me, it wasn't even this religious thing. Like I have to figure out how to see God so that I can be healed. None of it was this idea of like, I started to visualize that God is like the sun. And so always in relationship to the planet in the same orbit. But like with an eclipse, the sun gets covered and I could tell my pain, my abandonment triggers, my fears, my anxiety, my am I loved, my attachment system, all of that can block out the sun. And then I feel, and so my true darkness wasn't because it was proving that God didn't like me and was abandoning me.
It wasn't that the sun wasn't there.
It wasn't that the sun wasn't there. It was that my pain eclipsed the sun.
Wow.
And that has dramatically helped me because the more that I can be aware that there is someone that loves me all the time, and it's not about what I do. It's not about how good I am or how bad I am. And it's not about make somebody happy with me. But there is just a being that loves me all of the time. And when I don't feel that, it's not because they have removed themselves. It's because my pain is loud. And I get that. Like, we learn about triggers.
Yeah.
And so when I'm triggered with Justin, my pain shows up. So I don't remember all of who he is.
So true.
Like,
Yeah.
When I'm triggered with him, I don't remember the 5 things he did today to love me well. I remember the 5 things he's done through the last few years that didn't love me. And so the way that I work to deal with trigger brain with Justin is I actually look at perspective. Like, how do I know he actually loves me?
Yeah.
Where is his love? Where can I see it at? To help remind my brain more than just that one experience. Now, I don't invalidate the experience. I'm like, of course you're feeling unloved. And I had to do that through this whole process. Of course you feel unloved. That makes sense. It makes sense because of the story you're telling yourself.
Yeah.
Like the story I was telling myself was that because I wasn't healed, I was unloved. So of course I was feeling that.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel shame about that because it made sense to me. Of course I felt that way. I've seen that throughout my life. But that doesn't mean that's the truth.
What have you noticed, Rachel, in your healing process on the other side of coming out of a season where there was such a real painful loss, and then the way that that loss was approached?
Well, I think that I felt a lot of the kindness of God towards me in the midst of it, which I think did really help. I felt a sense of like attunement with God when I was in this season, which felt like God wasn't giving me any solutions or any answers or any ideas or any concepts that was going to make me feel powerful.
Didn't help you unwind your healing theology.
No.
What did attunement look like?
To me, I remember when I would pray, I would very rarely hear anything, but I would feel a presence of kindness coming at me. And I remember I would have a lot of like, the only thing I could hear at the time was a voice of God being like, I'm so sorry that this is so hard. Like I could feel a God toward me being like, I know. And that's like what I would hear over and over. It's just God being like, I could hear like the expression of like, I know. And I think the part for me was a sense of like becoming acquainted with the nature of God that I needed at the time, which is a nature of God who understood suffering and had lived in a body that had suffered. And that became really like more real to me down the line, but sort of began at that point when I could just feel like God is the great attuner of the human soul. And it's like, what other God would climb into the human experience to have a felt experience of what it's like to suffer and what it's like to die and what it's like to fear death and what it's like to watch others die. And it was like the sense of like a God who knows. And that to me was like attachment with God. And, you know, it was frustrating that I felt like he didn't give me any answers.
Totally.
Which I also felt like he was kind about. Like, I could feel his kindness being like, I know there's no answers for you.
Well,
I know that's so hard.
In trigger brain, there isn't an answer that would, like, now that I understand triggers, there isn't, our brain tells us a solution will make us feel safe.
Yes.
But actually, co-regulation is the thing that will make us feel the most safe. There's no logic that immediately takes your body out of fight or flight.
And in hindsight, like as I've become a little bit more trauma aware, because I had a lot of PTSD after that and had to go to a lot of expensive therapy.
Me too, girl.
What I understood in hindsight was like, oh my gosh, I have a trauma aware God. How fun.
Yes.
And part of it was because it was like he gave me what it is that my nervous system really needed, which was some semblance of a source of witness. When you think about trauma, a lot of times trauma exists inside of two different things together. So the event itself
Yep.
And then the lack of emotional attunement or reassurance or connection in hindsight or post the event.
Yeah.
So when you look at like high levels trauma, often those both things are happening side by side, that traumatic event, and then no one was there to comfort. And there was a resource inside of that experience, which, to be honest, in the moment I felt kind of connected to.
Sure.
In hindsight, it helped me process because I could remember feeling little glimmers of a God who was present with the suffering of the situation. And as I remembered that, I could almost like grow my awareness of that experience of like, oh yeah, he really was attuned with me. Like he knew, he had an experience of suffering and understood suffering and was with me inside of that experience. And I think my priority became, I need God.
Yeah.
Like there was a sense of like, I don't actually know if I care if it's like what my theology, like at the time I was like, I don't know if I really care what the right thing to believe is.
Yeah.
I think that I just know that I need
I
God.
need something bigger than me that loves me and is with me all the time.
Yes. And I do need a sense of a God who cares enough to intervene. Like I did feel like I needed something to say, like, a God who cares enough to intervene, and then there's like a mystery of things I don't understand for why it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I felt like I needed those things to be okay. Like I needed some sense of like, not a God who's like passive and like
good luck
on your own. So
yeah,
but a God who was attuned in with me inside that experience. And so I did think, how can I make that experience for myself? And I kind of thought, I don't know if this is the best theology or the right one or whatever, but I just know I need God.
Yeah.
So how do I get back to feeling safe with God?
It's very true. I think one of the reasons that deconstructing can feel so out of control to people is because oftentimes God has been a primary attachment, which means one of the sources of safety and regulation and connection and feeling known and seen. And I love deconstruction because there's a million, I mean, like this whole conversation is me processing deconstruction, realizing that I had beliefs about God that weren't helping me. And so weeding that out is important. But oftentimes when people deconstruct, they don't know how to hold, they don't know then what is true about God. And letting go of having that connection can feel so destabilizing.
And so disorienting.
Yeah, and a lot of deconstruction, because that was my foundation of how I got to a place of a loving God. God was deconstruction. It was tearing apart the belief system that had been wired from ground up, and then going, what are the pieces that actually really do matter? But there's such black and white thinking within that. Just as a side note that I was thinking about, there's such black and white thinking. It's like I'll throw everything out and move on with life and tear all my belief systems down. But
what were you going to say? Rachel had something.
Sorry.
No, that's great. I was going to say one thing that really helped me was I had the sense of like, I don't know if I can figure out everything about God. In fact, I don't know that I'm ever going to I'm never going to have a full picture. Like there is a surrender to the uncertainty of that. One thing I did do was like, could I connect to one thing at a time about God that could feel true to me, that I could hold on to. And in ways it was kind of funny for me at the time. I just thought about, because, I'm a huge attachment nerd and emotional health nerd. So I just thought about it from an attachment perspective, like what makes a little kid feel safe with their grown parents. So I thought, well, it helps kids feel safe when the parent looks at them and has like warm, soft eyes when they look at them. And because it signals to them like, I'm happy you're here. You're welcome. This is a safe place. So I thought, okay, I could just like sit here and like picture God's eyes. And looking soft with like little crinkles on the side. And I could just sit there and then think about that aspect of God and just see if I could grow my own capacity to feel that and receive
to be
that,
aware of it,
bring my own awareness to allowing that to affect me, like allowing myself to be affected by a kind God towards me while holding a lot of uncertainty. Like, I don't know about all the things. But I do know God is loving, and so here's one aspect of love, and that would be soft eyes. And then I did that with like soft, kind touch. Like I imagined, like if God were here and he was Jesus in human form, he'd probably hold my hand. And what would like a warm, soft hand holding me feel like? And I could bring my like attention and awareness of that and allow that to impact me. So I just did like one quality of a safe God at a time. And over time, that ended up informing what I started to believe to be true about God.
Yeah, and it really softened you towards connecting and attachment with him.
I noticed on that note, and I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but when Abby was at her worst, I let go of my right to accuse God. There was this sense of the right to be judged and make an accusation. Like when we have pain, we want to create accusation and send it somewhere. Like if this
any
is
kind of pain.
Yeah. Blame is like right there.
Blame is right there.
Ourselves or out of me.
It's either all my fault or it's someone's fault and I'm going to make them pay.
Yeah. And once we can find something to blame, then we can create distance from that thing that's causing us pain, hoping to alleviate the pain.
100%.
And for me, I let go of any of my blame that I had. And I realized like, in my relationship with accusation, wherever I want to place it, like right now I'm placing it towards something that actually could be a deeply profound resource to me to get me through this. That resource being a source of love, a source of compassion, a source of understanding. And so immediately as I began to surrender that accusational process that I had inside of me, I could reconnect to that. And I went from surviving and to actually finding my place of peace and my place of resolve and even my place of
and then you had something actually to offer me.
Right.
In a different way. Because when you were in panic with me, you were in panic with me.
Yeah.
When you were angry at God, you weren't regulated. I wasn't regulated. And we were both just surviving.
Yeah. And so I was able to start coming out of survival mode and into a sense of thriving inside of that, even thriving within uncertainty. Like, but I don't know how she's going to get a resolve here. And that's okay. And if she doesn't, and if she does die, like, am I still okay? Is there still a good dad that's involved, a good Heavenly Papa that's involved inside of my story? Yeah, just because she passes away doesn't mean there's not an involvement. Doesn't mean that I'm alone and abandoned inside of the situation. Doesn't mean that she was alone and abandoned in it. Like we all will have our time to die. That's going to happen at some point in time. So, but a lot started to get resolved inside of me in that, and I could then show up entirely different.
I
do want to add one other thing.
Yeah.
Part of, for me, I operate out of the idea that God's miraculous answers comes through different expressions.
Absolutely.
And I think that we get into a rut of what the miraculous has to look like.
One way.
Yeah.
And
that's very trigger brain, is to think there's one solution and that's what'll make me feel okay.
Yeah.
And only that solution. Whereas when you're not in trigger brain, there's so many options for any problem that can bring relief.
To me, it didn't necessarily have to look like, this is going to be a miraculous physical healing in some moment of prayer or something like that, where it just disappears, which again, I've seen stuff like that. It could, however, be the miraculousness of the doctor we find, the treatments we find, the financial capabilities to pay for something. Like all of that, to me, all of a sudden became, I can see the potential for the miraculous involvement of God all around me open up. And I was able to go like, all right, so what does that look like? What are we pursuing? And to me, it takes as much faith to believe that the money's going to come through for some ridiculously expensive treatment as it does for physical,
miraculous healing,
physical body 100%. Healing just to take place inside of it. And I think that I've become a more open person in the sense of like, however this is going to happen, like, all right, I believe that it's possible. I believe that there's resolution out there. What does that look like?
Yeah. I think I'd like to do another episode because I'm like, I have too many thoughts to wrap up, and I know we're at the end of time for this one. Yeah. But I think it'd be good to end on this, which is, I think Rachel's story is so beautiful of like looking back and seeing God's attunement with her in the trauma. I could not feel God in the trauma. Like it was not, I didn't hear him saying anything. And that was very peculiar for me because my whole life I had felt him. But when I went into PTSD, before I got sick, I started having PTSD, but then the sickness like went to a whole new level. Yeah. I had never had anything that was so big that could completely fracture my ability to connect to God. And I don't think I felt like fully alone. Like I wouldn't say that, like there just wasn't any, there was no talking or like feeling that like warm comfort or that sweet sense or just that soft, like, but there was different ways that I think I can look back and see different ways that God was involved in my story. But the reason I brought that up is I'm just wanting anybody can relate. I'm wanting anybody from whatever stage you're in, because now I can feel God and through the healing process that I've gone through. And now I see God very different about where he was in that story and what was happening. And now I don't feel like God abandoned me, and I don't feel like I was alone. And so I just think it's important, like wherever you're at, there is a pathway to love. There's a pathway to finding God, and it may look different than you think. Like my healing process has looked very different than I imagined it would, but it's been beautiful. And my view of God as healer, like I'm the most soft towards God as a physical healer now in my life than I ever have been. Still sick and having lived through like crazy PTSD from how sick I was, and having lived a whole life where this was the most painful subject for me, I now feel the most resolved with God that I ever have. And so and the understanding of that there can be something that is intangible beyond your circumstances, where you can actually find comfort beyond what seems logical to you, is so hopeful to me.
Yeah.
So I think we'll do maybe another episode. We can talk through more of that.
Cool. Any final thoughts, Rachel, as you're wrapping up?
I love that. I think that I love what you're saying about having compassion on yourself either way. I think that like modeling, I think there were definitely moments inside of my experience where I just wanted to scream at God.
Totally.
And be like, fuck
Absolutely.
you, you're ruining my life.
Yes.
So I definitely want to make sure that it doesn't sound like, oh, the whole time was so wonderful.
Totally.
I felt so loved and attuned by God.
Yeah. I know, because I watched you, that I was like, you had very small whiffs.
I had whiffs of it.
Yes.
That then I found ways to circle back to.
Yeah.
But I think it's really what feels like so important is being able to have so much compassion in our own systems of the things that we employ to make it through really painful seasons. And it's like our whole body works to try to protect us when we're in overwhelming states.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when we're in a self-protected state like that, love getting in
It's really hard.
is so hard and feels so scary and painful. It actually feels painful to try to like love in when we're in that much of a sense of needing to protect because of how scared we are. And so I love the idea of just the sense of compassion either way, and then the love that you can connect to, allowing that to expand and grow. I think that is something that has helped me, is like when I did feel a whiff, being like, okay, like this one counselor I really liked, she calls it turning a glimmer into a glow, is what she calls it, where it's like, I'm just going to catch the little tiny little micro moment of regulation or safety or goodness. And can I just grow my capacity to receive that?
And be aware of it and think about how good that feels.
Yeah.
And focus on the goodness of that instead of the lack of how big it is or the lack of where else you don't have it.
100%. And allowing those experiences to anchor me in safety in my current life now. Yeah. And it really does make a felt difference. But it doesn't mean that it fixes it.
Yeah.
But it makes a felt difference.
It really does.
Yeah. Well, if you've been listening to this and you've been in through your own questions and curiosities with regards to God and pains with healing and disappointments and stuff like that, we so understand. We get it. We've been there. And if it's helpful, just getting to hear conversations like this, and you know that other people need to be able to have conversations like this, where there's authentic conversations about the difficulties that we have, as well as hope that there's, we actually could get to the other side of having resolution. Be sure to take this podcast and share it with those people. And let people know about it, because like these are conversations that are so vital to bringing healing to the human soul, is when we can be honest about things and we can find hope on the other side of the things that cause us pain. So anyways, it's been a good time sitting here chatting back and forth. And
can we just pray for people?
Yeah, go ahead. You can do that.
Well, one, You guys, if you want to be a part of LCMC, signups are happening soon. The Life Consulting Masterclass. It's a year-long school. Rachel is very involved. So are me and Justin. It is a great time of learning how to practically transform your beliefs, like I was talking about, how to practically connect to love and resource, make glimmers aglow. Like there's so much we don't go into on this podcast because there's not time. But we really do a deep dive in trying to understand the way that you work as a human and how to connect to love. So
you can email us at support@stumvalconsulting.com to get on our waiting list as far as to know when the applications process is going to start. So
yeah. And I think the Compassion Project is always, if you're on this journey and feeling disconnected or feeling out of control, the Compassion Project is a great series that we have that can help you connect to compassion. You can find that at www.justinabby.com. I was feeling grateful for that because that's actually the way we paid. We made that course to help us pay to go to Spain when I was so sick. Yeah, which was
a big deal.
A miracle. So thanks to everybody who bought it. And also you can still go buy it now. But let's pray.
Go ahead.
God, we just ask that your kindness and your tenderness would meet people wherever they're at, with whatever pain they've walked through, with whatever their road of suffering has been, that they would feel the sweetness of your presence that is with them. That every place where people feel alone, that there would just be a glimmer that you know them, you know where they are, and you know how hard it's been. That they would just feel your connection, your closeness, your sweetness, and your love. You want to pray anything, Rachel?
Yeah, God, I just pray that you would show everyone listening your soft eyes and your warm hands and your soft tone of voice. And I just pray that everyone listening would see eyes that never lost their glimmer or light when they looked at you. That never had eyes of disappointment or frustration. That everyone listening would just feel the presence of what it feels like to have someone look at you and accept you right where you're at and like you and love you and want to be with you just as you are.
Yeah. Papa, for your kiddos that are just feeling a lot of torment about suffering that they've been in, whether that's emotional or that's physical, and where they feel confused and disappointed, wondering where love is at, that comfort could break in to their world as they're sitting here listening to this, that something would overtake them and they would go, I don't know what it is, but I don't feel alone. I could feel some presence of care that's involved inside of my story. And that I'm not just trapped here like this forever. That there is a goodness available to me in this process.
And I just want to remind you that you are not alone.
Yeah.
And this is not how your story ends. And that there are so many answers and solutions and gifts beyond what you can imagine. For some of you out there, you need to hear what I can say is true now, that you're going to feel okay again.
Yeah.
You're going to remember who you are again. You're going to find your joy again. You're going to find that place where you feel like there's solid ground under your feet again. It may take some time, but the trauma doesn't last forever. So I give you permission to have hope while you're in the process. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah. Guys, it was good hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
Aww.
Love you, Rachel.
Love you guys.
Bye, everybody.